Alright, Kinds of Kindness is Yorgos Lanthimos' follow-up to Poor Things, his huge hit from last year, and features a whole bunch of the same actors, as well as some new faces who are slowly finding their way into more and more roles, like Jesse Plemons and Hong Chow. By the way, if I totally botched Yorgos' name, I'm sorry, but what do you expect from me? So I watched Poor Things on, of all platforms, Disney Plus a few months back, and I was left sort of confused. I did enjoy the movie, especially the unbelievable sets, some of which I still can't begin to comprehend the making of, and yet, the whole thing felt very depraved and lacked subtlety. I understand that that's sort of Yorgos' angle, since this man loves stuffing his movies full of sex and perversion, and I'm not the type of person to shy away from that kind of stuff just because it makes me uncomfortable, but sometimes aiming for shock value can end up seeming hollow. And yet, here we are. I can't deny that, from a technical perspective, Poor Things was one of the greatest achievements of 2023, and the directing style truly did make a big impression on me. A follow-up this soon seemed a bit strange, but the cast was just as stacked, and the trailer was wildly interesting. I managed to get into the theaters this week for Kinds of Kindness, and it ended up being one of my favorite movies of the year so far. But to comment on that, we're gonna get into spoilers, so click off if you don't want that. Since Kinds of Kindness takes place in 3 parts, I think it's only fair to split them up into 3 sections, then talk about my general thoughts. The first is the death of RMF, and it's also probably my favorite. This short surrounds Robert Fletcher, Jesse Plemons' character, who has signed up to have every aspect of his life controlled by Willem Dafoe, in what would be his most fitting role of all time if he didn't have another character in this same movie that's even more tailor-made for his creepy ass. The concept of someone controlling everything that you do is so inherently frightening, but framing it as an occupation and leaving a few of the things Dafoe's character requires unexplained perfects it. Fletcher's life really does fall apart completely when he stops servicing Raymond, and he becomes, like many of Yorgos' characters, utterly pathetic and useless, playing into one of the few themes which acts as connective tissue between the pieces of the triptych, which is a person degrading themselves in order to please another. Oh, and also a fun little detail I picked up on, which was almost certainly intentional, is that while RMF is Robert's target to kill, he doesn't die initially, and since Robert, Raymond, and Rita, Emma Stone's character, and Robert's replacement, each have RF names, we can assume their middle names begin with M, and that means any of them could be the death the title is referring to. But no, it is just RMF at the end. He's the one that dies anyway, but it makes for a much more engaging story the way the audience played with. Final notes, I would say that the death of RMF contains the most effective, witty humor of the movie, another Yorgos staple. Scenes like Robert getting drunk and miserably failing to recreate his first encounter with his wife got a laugh from my audience, and felt like they slotted in nicely without disturbing the tone. Overall, I really enjoyed this first short, but I think it's time to move on to the second, RMF is Flying, which is much tougher to watch. RMF is Flying is another one about Jesse Plemons. It's kind of funny that Emma Stone is billed at the very top, considering 2 of the stories are much more about the wonderful Plemon man, even if she is the absolute star of the last story. In this one, Jesse Plemons plays a cop, so we're already off to a bad start. Daniel's wife has gone missing, along with a bunch of her co-workers, but she eventually returns, being the only survivor aside from one other in critical condition. However, she might not be who she seems. Daniel believes that his wife has been replaced by a doppelganger that wants to harm him, so he begins to mistreat her and confide in his friends about his suspicions. The movie is very smart about treading the line between this obviously being his wife and the possibility of her actually being a fake. I mean, any viewer would have an inherent suspicion piqued when you place a conspiracy in front of them, and the rest of the evidence isn't nothing. She is actually acting pretty strange, and the most twisted conclusion would be to reveal that he was right the whole time and no one believed him. I mean, who could those calls be from? That seems to be what you get when another Emma Stone appears at the door, but I'm not so sure. Along with these hints, the short also drops not-so-subtle hints that Daniel is kind of a psycho. He shoots a guy's fingers off while confronting him for, speeding, and that's first attributed to just being his anxiety due to these weird circumstances, but then he starts asking his wife, in quotations, to start serving him pieces of her body, until, by the end, she kills herself for him. Then, and only then, does his true wife show up, but with no scratches on her, wearing, if I remember correctly, the exact same clothes as the dead woman, and smiling as if she hadn't gone through serious psychological trauma. If she had been replaced by a doppelganger, wouldn't that mean she died on the island she was stranded on? It just doesn't add up. Plus, Daniel has notably not been taking his medication, so I think it's fair to say that he's imagining this perfect ending. I love a good puzzle, and this one here requires the most deduction. This short is also particularly effective at utilizing gross visuals. The whole movie does this, really, but in the second short, you get everything from bloody raw beef to a full-on liver lying on the floor. RMF is Flying was when I felt the most uncertain and uneasy, definitely. There's a slow build of nervousness that just has some psychotic leaps thrown in that can feel a little jarring, and the whole thing might be a little overdone with the gruesomeness, but I can't deny that it worked. I would totally understand if this was someone's least favorite, because it for sure is the least enjoyable to watch, and hell, I might even agree with you. I have a lot of appreciation for RMF's Flying, and a lot of appreciation for Jesse Plemons' fucking horrifying performance. But this is definitely the worst Willem Dafoe in the movie. Normal dad? Come on, give him a little bit more to chew on. The final part is called RMF Eats a Sandwich, but don't let that fool you. This is about a cult. And Willem Dafoe is the cult leader, so I guess I got my wish. Here we follow Emily, as she searches for the Chosen One, a girl who the cult believes will be able to bring back people from the dead. The system of the cult is one of my favorite parts of this whole film, by the way. I didn't notice this myself, I'll have to credit my dad for pointing out a lot of the details. The group believes that all earthly water is contaminated except from those who are pure, like Willem Dafoe's Omi and Hong Chau's Akka. They cry into a pool that the rest of the group gets their water from, and no members are allowed to have sex with anyone outside of those two, because the dirty water from the outsiders would contaminate them. The world building is incredibly efficient, and the movie doesn't even try to flaunt it. This is something you have to piece together yourself, but it's so clever that it could be extended into a 2-hour story by itself. It just happens to function better through juxtaposition against the other two. On the other side of things, the biggest negative with RMF Eats a Sandwich is the tonal dissonance. Yorgos Lanthimos loves to freak out the audience with brutally uncomfortable scenes, but he also loves wacky personalities and character quirks. Most of the time he can mix the two without it becoming a problem, but when you place a realistic and unforgiving rape scene in the middle of the most outwardly ridiculous short of the three, it's hard to rebound. Any example of dark comedy and witty chaos that takes place after this is undermined by how goddamn dark it's gotten. So when I'm sitting and watching Emma Stone doing her funny little dance for the trailer, there are two thoughts running through my mind. One is, man, this is a very strange conclusion given how much trauma she's suffered during just this sequence. And the other is, oh my god, she's kinda hitting that shit. Because, I mean, she is. What am I supposed to say? Moving on to general thoughts, the first thing that I picked up on, and the first thing that I'd like to address, is the music. Dude, this score is incredible. Remember how I said that the second short was fantastic at building intensity and nervousness? Well, that's actually the whole movie. It's just the most noticeable there. The music is one of the strongest contributors, since it's almost entirely made up of thundering, standalone piano notes that really make you jump. Sometimes the fuckers are louder than the dialogue. The score is always keeping you on your toes, like you're a dog and it's the 4th of July, which was yesterday when I'm writing this, Go America. Additionally, like Poor Things, but to a less surreal extent, the sets and camera work are stunning. Quick pans are plenty, and even the most minuscule details are given recognizable qualities, such as Emily's car, which is a striking purple. The costuming for characters like Robert and Emily are perfectly fitting to their traits, and in the case of Robert, he looks like he came from decades in the past despite the movie taking place in the present, only making things weirder. But the biggest connective tissue is for sure the thematic pattern of one character doing everything they can, even risking their own well-being, to please another. As I mentioned earlier, Robert has his entire life constructed by Raymond, and this is not against his will, as he completes each request under the belief that Raymond knows the perfect way of living. He denies killing at the beginning, but takes pleasure in it by the end, even when he is off the hook as an employee, just to please Raymond. RMF is Flying is the only one where the main character is not the one being controlled, but rather the dominant one who asks his own wife to mutilate herself for him. Despite how horrible it sounds, she does it, wanting to finally convince him that she is not a faker. And the last section is pretty cut and dry. It's a cult, and even when Emily is outcast from the cult, she still searches for their chosen one and ultimately finds her, then gets her killed because she's an insane driver, which I'll admit was actually really smart. That is the solution, or at least my solution to the triptych, but there could be more. The continuing theme of a seemingly impossible situation still occurring does happen each time if you believe that Daniel's wife at the end was real. Not being able to trust anyone is most prominent in the second part, but appears in the first and third through Robert's investigation of Rita and Emily's expulsion from the cult. And if you have a theory that pieces them all together, feel free to share that too, because I'm sure there's something I'm missing. Kinds of Kindness is a very intelligent movie, and it's also sort of mind-boggling. I would 100% recommend this if you're down for something wacky. It doesn't get quite as depraved as Poor Things does, but it's far from a family movie. It actually kind of feels like watching 3 movies in full, since each one has a pretty lengthy runtime, much more than a usual short film. Above all, though, it's a very cool experience and one of my top movies of the year so far. I'd give Kinds of Kindness a solid 9 out of 10, and I might even continue to dive into the Yorgos Lanthimos filmography. And if I am still saying his name wrong, video's over. Have a good one. Bye now.